The small apartment was quiet, too quiet for a child. The little girl sat on the floor with her knees pulled close, staring at her mother who lay still on the ground. She had never seen her like this before. Her tiny heart raced, and her hands shook as she whispered, "Mama, please wake up." But there was no answer. The room felt colder with every passing second, and the silence pressed heavy on her. She looked around, not knowing what to do. She was too young to understand sickness, too small to carry help to her mother. But she remembered something she had once seen on television when someone is in danger. People dial a number, and help comes. She grabbed the old phone on the table. Her hands trembled so badly she almost dropped it. But with a deep breath she pressed the buttons one by one. The ringing echoed in her ear. She expected a voice to answer quickly, but it went longer than she thought. She bit her lip and almost hung up, but then a voice came through. It wasn't what she thought it would be. It wasn't the calm voice of an emergency worker. It was deeper, older, unsure. "Hello, who is this?" Her small voice cracked. "Please, help me. My mama won't wake up." On the other side of the line, far away in a tall glass building, a man sat at a desk filled with papers and glowing screens. He was the kind of man people called only when they needed money or deals. He was powerful, wealthy, and always busy. But in that moment, as he heard the soft cry of a child through his private line, he froze. At first he thought it must be a mistake, maybe a prank. But then he heard the fear in her voice. It wasn't fake. It was real. She told him about her mother lying on the floor, not moving. She told him she was alone and didn't know what to do. Her words were broken, but every word carried the weight of her fear. The man leaned forward in his chair, gripping the phone tighter. He had been in meetings all day, making decisions about millions. But none of those decisions had ever sounded as urgent as this. For the first time in years, someone needed him not for his money, but for life itself. And he couldn't bring himself to hang up. The man did not move for a moment, his hands still gripping the phone. The city lights stretched outside his tall office window, but his eyes were fixed on nothing, only the voice of the little girl filling the silence. "Tell me," he said gently, "is your mama breathing?" His tone was steady, though inside his chest something stirred an urgency he had never felt in boardrooms or meetings. The girl bent low, her ear close to her mother's lips. "I think." Very slow, she whispered. Her breath caught, and for a moment she almost cried, but the voice on the other end steadied her. "Good, stay with me," he told her. It was strange for him. He was a man used to commanding hundreds, signing documents worth fortunes. Yet he had never spoken with a child this way. His assistants feared him, his partners respected him, but this small, trembling voice needed him. It disarmed him. He scribbled on a pad, writing down her words quickly, an address, a landmark, the small details she gave between sobs. Without wasting time, he pressed another button on his desk phone, connecting directly to someone who always answered. "Send an ambulance. Right now," he ordered. "A woman has collapsed. A child is alone with her." His voice, though calm, carried an edge that made the person on the other end obey instantly. But he did not end the call with the girl. He kept the line open. He asked her to describe the room, the color of her mother's dress, the sound of the clock ticking in the corner. He kept her talking so she would not feel the weight of the silence pressing down. The girl whispered back every answer, her words shaky, but her breathing steadied little by little. "Are you really coming?" she asked softly. The question pierced deeper than any demand he had ever heard in his life. He looked at the papers scattered on his desk, the contracts waiting for his approval, the glowing screens filled with numbers. They suddenly felt meaningless. He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked out of his office. "Yes," he said firmly into the phone. "I'm coming." "You're not alone anymore." The elevator doors closed behind him, carrying him down from the world of power into the streets below. For the first time, his footsteps weren't rushing to meet investors or partners, they were rushing toward a stranger, a child whose life had somehow found its way into his hands. The car engine roared as he sped through the empty city streets. His driver, startled by the sudden order to move without destination, kept glancing at him through the mirror. But the man only repeated the address written on the paper, his voice sharp, urgent. He still held the phone pressed to his ear, unwilling to let the little girl's voice fade, unwilling to let her feel abandoned. On the other side, the child crouched beside her mother, clutching the receiver tightly. She whispered, "I can hear sirens far away. Are they coming here?" Her voice carried both hope and fear, as if afraid the help might pass them by. "They're coming for you," he assured her, his eyes fixed on the flashing lights of an ambulance racing to blocks ahead of his car. "Just stay where you are. Keep talking to me. You're very brave." No one had ever called her brave before. The words settled in her small heart like a candle flame in the dark. Her tears slowed. She told him about the blanket covering her mother, about the photo frame on the table with faded edges, about the single light bulb buzzing overhead. Her descriptions painted a picture in his mind, sharper than anything on a glossy report. He could almost see the tiny room, feel the weight of her loneliness. As his car turned corner after corner, the CEO's thoughts shifted. For years, he had measured success in profits, towers built, deals won. Yet tonight, his heart pounded not because of numbers, but because a little girl believed in his promise, and he could not afford to break it. The sirens grew louder. The girl gasped into the phone. "They're here. They're here." He heard the pounding of heavy boots, the knock at the door, the rush of voices. Relief flickered through him, but he didn't hang up. He wanted to hear her safe. The paramedics entered, their voices brisk and calm. "We've got her," one said in the background. The girl clutched the phone tighter and whispered, "Don't go. Please don't go yet." "I won't," he replied softly. Then, almost without thinking, he told the driver to stop. The ambulance lights glowed just ahead, painting the night red and blue. He stepped out, the cold air cutting across his face. This wasn't supposed to be his world. Small apartments, worried children, collapsing mothers. Yet tonight, it was. And with every step toward that flickering light, he knew his life was crossing into something he had never expected. The hallway smelled faintly of damp plaster and old wood as he climbed the narrow stairs. The sirens outside had quieted, but the flicker of red and blue lights spilled through the broken window panes. He could hear voices from the apartment low, urgent commands from the paramedics, the shuffle of feet moving carefully. He stepped through the open door and froze. The room was smaller than he had imagined. A thin carpet covered the floor, worn from years of use. A table stood to one side with cracked edges and to mismatched chairs. In the corner, the little girl sat, the phone still clutched in her hand, her wide eyes darting toward the doorway. When she saw him, her breath caught. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "You came." The words pierced him deeper than anything he had heard in his years of commanding boardrooms. He had heard men shout, beg, argue, flatter, but never had the simple words carried such weight. He stepped forward slowly, lowering himself to her level. "I told you I would," he said, his voice steady but soft. The paramedics lifted her mother onto a stretcher, checking her pulse, speaking to one another in quick bursts. The girl's hand twitched as if she wanted to reach for her mother, but instead she gripped the corner of his coat. He let her hold on. He glanced around, noticing the thin blanket on the bed, the faded curtains, the empty plates stacked near the sink. It was a life far different from his own, a world he had never truly entered until now. And standing there, with the girl's small hand gripping him like an anchor, he realized how far removed he had been from the people, whose lives existed beyond the glass towers of his empire. One of the paramedics spoke directly to him. "She's stable for now, but we need to move fast." He nodded, though his eyes stayed on the girl. She looked torn between fear and hope. "Can I come with Mama?" she asked softly. He crouched lower, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "You'll be right behind her. I'll make sure of it." As they carried the stretcher past him, he rose, his tall figure filling the doorway. He felt something shift inside, a responsibility he had never chosen, but now could not ignore. The girl stayed close, her hand slipping into his without hesitation. And in that moment, for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man of wealth or power. He felt simply human. The hospital corridor hummed with the low rhythm of machines and hurried footsteps. The girl sat beside him on a hard plastic chair, her legs too short to reach the floor. She clutched a small doll with torn fabric, holding it as tightly as she had held his coat earlier. Every few minutes she would glance at the double doors where her mother had been taken, then back at him, as if to make sure he hadn't vanished. He stayed. Meetings could wait, deals could be signed tomorrow, but tonight his place was here. It surprised even him how natural it felt to remain by her side. He wasn't used to being still, but the child's quiet trust kept him rooted. When the doctor finally emerged, the girl leapt to her feet, eyes wide. The doctor crouched and gave her a gentle smile. "Your mother is resting. She'll be all right, but she needs care and time." Relief washed over her small face, and she hugged her doll so tightly it looked as though she might never let go. The man felt his shoulders ease for the first time that night. He hadn't realized until that moment how tense he had been, how deeply invested he was in the fate of strangers. Yet they didn't feel like strangers anymore. The girl turned toward him, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you. If you didn't answer, I don't know what would have happened." He swallowed, caught off guard. All his life, people had thanked him for signing contracts, for building towers, for creating jobs. But this was different. This was a thank you that reached somewhere money could never touch. Days later, when the mother was well enough to smile and speak, he visited them again. The girl ran to greet him, no longer trembling, but full of a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. And in her mother's eyes, he saw gratitude too deep for words. Back in his world of polished offices and endless negotiations, people noticed changes. He listened longer in meetings, spoke with more patience, questioned not just profits, but the human cost behind them. Soon, he launched a foundation to support emergency response for children and families in crises. A decision that shocked his board, but felt like the most natural thing he had ever done. All because one night, a little girl dialed a number in desperation, and the call that was never meant for him changed everything for her mother, and for him.